So welcome to this second session of the day. That's actually good to be in that spot just before lunch. Worse to be after, actually. But before I start, who I am, I'm Thomas Kunitz, and excuse my English, I'm French. So I'll try to speak, as best as I can and probably as slow as I can. I tend to speak quite fast, not as fast as Andy, but quite fast altogether. I'm a system engineer since FileMaker 5.5 at FileMaker, and I look after the Southern Europe region. Well, I have to say Southern Europe is a bit small because it starts in the Netherlands, ends in South Africa, and goes up to India. So it's a nice way to put Southern Europe, but that's probably the rest of the world. So now you understand why I'm actually quite eager to mapping and geolocation. This is really something quite interesting. And how many of you use an iPhone? Yeah, quite a lot. How many of you use Google Maps on the iPhone? I use it all the time. That's probably my first use of the iPhone, is just to know where I am and to know where I want to go. And what I'm going to show you today is actually how we can use maps, geolocation, just within FileMaker. So the agenda for today is going to be two topics. The first one is going to be about geolocation. So what it is to represent an address into FileMaker, what it is to represent multiple addresses or directions between those points. So I'll try to do that with a few slides, a few explanations, and a demo. Then I'll try to introduce the concept of mapping. This is quite an interesting thing to represent data. We've all used different ways to represent raw data into FileMaker. So you can have sub-summaries, you can have charting since FileMaker 11. And what I'm going to try to show you is how you can use mapping technologies to actually represent in a nice way, in a very different way, information that is in your database. So let's get started. One address. It's actually quite simple, and I have to admit that's been in the product since FileMaker 8.5. Actually, since we first introduced the web viewer. And nowadays, you can use that in many different ways to represent a physical address into a map using Google Maps services. You can actually use others, but that's what the point is. So what is an address exactly? An address is probably mainly a physical address. So it could be, I think that's the headquarters of FileMaker in the US. And this address can be represented into a URL. That's actually what you use in the web viewer since FileMaker 8.5 to represent this physical address into a map. So you do a bit of parsing. So you replace in the URL the first part, which is in blue, which is the fixed line. So this is the main point to request the map. You get questions. And then afterwards, it's just all parameters. You just pass those parameters to the web service, so to Google Maps, and it will answer back with a map representing that address into a web viewer. It's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty easy to use. It has been used quite extensively in all our starter solutions all over the years. However, in FileMaker 12, we introduced a new function, and a new function that only works in FileMaker Go, which is a mobile function. And that is the other way of representing an address. An address can be a physical address, but can also be GPS coordinates or geographical coordinates, like latitude and longitude. And we now have, with FileMaker 12, FileMaker Go 12, the ability to get that information directly from the device. The device, most devices, I would say, have GPS in the iPad or the iPhone. And even if you don't have a GPS, which is the Wi-Fi only version, you can still get the coordinates directly into FileMaker using Wi-Fi. So the more Wi-Fi you have, probably the best location you're going to get. But that's quite interesting because you can actually represent an address in two ways, whether it's a physical address or whether it's GPS coordinates. And that's what we call geocoding. However, on FileMaker Pro, those functions do not work. So you can't use the new mobile functions, so locations and location values, in FileMaker Pro. So how can you do that? And for this, I'm going to introduce two processes that I'm going to use extensively in the next demos. It's what is called geocoding. So geocoding is the fact of transferring or interpreting an address that is a physical address into latitude and longitude. So I've got this address in the, I don't know, the hotel address, and I want to have the geographical coordinates of that address. And that's actually quite useful because then I can actually use, instead of having a huge address, I can actually use only the coordinates that will pinpoint to this exact location in the hotel. However, it's interesting to do that I can actually do the opposite. I can actually get the location based on the coordinates and give an address back. So it may be very useful if I have tracked down with my iPhone or with my iPad and Pharmaca Go, the location of an address or the location of a customer. And then afterwards, I just want to get that location transferred into something readable for any human eyes, which is a physical address. And that's what is called the reverse geocoding. So I have a latitude and longitude, and I want to know what is at that point. You may not all want to use that. I was just discussing a bit earlier. If you were a diving shop or working in a desert to find points or locations, those points may not actually match to a physical address. So you could still get those addresses, track them down, and actually represent them. For those two processes, so geocoding and reverse geocoding, I will use the Google Maps API. So Google Maps actually provides the service. It's an online service where you can actually send the information and get a result back. It's actually pretty useful because you can use that from wherever you are. You can actually use that also on Pharmaca Go, sending the address, getting back the coordinates, or sending the coordinates, getting back the address. The request is pretty simple. You've seen the previous request, which was just a URL. This one doesn't, it's still the same. You have this fixed URL, which is going to be to tell basically the web viewer where to go or to tell insert script URL where to go. Then you have a few parameters. You need to specify the output, which means you need to specify in which language you want the answer to be back, in which format. You have two choices. First is JSON, and the other one is XML. I'll show you, how those two works. So you just need to specify what format you want the answer to be readable from that URL. And then you have parameters. If you pass the address, or if you pass the latitude, longitude, then you get back the results. You also have different options for languages. You say, why languages? Well, you could spell United States. Well, you could actually write United States. But you could also write États-Unis or Stati Uniti. So depending where you are, you may actually want the address in a specific language. If you're based in Italy, for instance, you may want to have all the addresses for different countries or different cities in the readable format for your users. So that's why you have the language. It does not really match for geographical coordinates. They would be exactly the same. The sensor is actually something that Google introduced a few years back for just to tell the API whether you have a GPS or not. In most cases, you will always set that flag to false. I'll put it that because it's a mandatory field, so you have to put it there. So if we were to concatenate the address of the headquarters of Pharmaca Inc., I would do this. I would first have the physical, the fixed parameter, then the XML to say, I want the results back to be XML, then the address, and then the sensor. It's actually pretty useful because you can get the results in an XML format. So who's familiar with XML? And the good thing is you don't have to be. You really don't have to be. And the good thing about that is XML is text. So the results that you're going to get from that request is going to be a text file. And for this, I'm using a new function that was introduced with Pharmaca 12 that's called insert from URL. And insert from URL is really nice because you can specify the address, and whatever is at the end of this address, whatever is matching on this address, you will get back into a field. And if that field happens to be a text field, you'll get everything here. And then it's just a parsing mechanism to say, I've got an XML document, I've got a string, whatever it's XML or not, I've got a string into that field. Now I just need to parse that information. As you can see, XML is structured. And it's always structured the same. So once you've done it once, you can use it for all requests. And that's a very good thing because you can actually parse that information to look for the exact information you want. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but just look at this. This is the street number, this is the route, this is the locality. So you can actually get those different information, the only information that you want. So you could parse that information with simple calculations like you always do in FileMaker, like position, like pardon count, like middle, left values, words, whatever. FileMaker is really powerful in managing text. With the calculation engine, you can actually manage all those things very easily, and that will work for every request because it's structured. In my examples, I will use a custom function. That's typically the use of custom functions. You do your custom function once, and then you can reuse it, different files, different occasions, or different requests. Always use the same calculations. Once you've done it, it's good. But actually, you don't have to do it because I already did it. So let me show you how it's done. So here I have a simple file with address and latitude, longitude. So for that purpose, I'm going to try to remember the address of the hotel. I think it's 41 Collins Avenue, right? Cities, Miami Beach, state is Florida. And you can see that the map is already given. And the reason is, sometimes, and more often than not, the address is unique. So they know that there is only one 44-1 Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. So the web viewer and the Google API actually knows exactly what to feed that information back. So I can say it's going to be USA, and postal code I think is 23140. Am I correct? That's it. So I got the address, I got the map. Now I want to transform that address into latitude and longitude. I don't have an iPhone. I could do this with the iPhone and the iPad to get that location now, but I don't. So I could geocoding. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take those fields, create the request, and analyze the results. If I do here, you actually didn't see this. It was actually a request URL, and the result is here. I don't know if you can see, but I'll try to zoom in. As you can see, the result is coming back into a XML document or a text file. And now the only thing that I need to parse is actually to look for the location tag. And once I got the location tag, I just need to get the latitude and longitude. It's pretty straightforward because this information will never change. Well, unless Google changes its API, but at least this information will work whether the address is in France, in Italy, in Netherlands, in US, Mexico, whatever, the result is going to be sent back. And actually, if you have errors, if you can't find the address, those fields will be empty. So couldn't match this address to a physical location. That may happen, especially if you, instead of having a street address, you've got a PO box. PO box, means something for the delivery, but not really for a mapping system. So now I've got the address, and I've got the latitude, longitude. So I can actually match whatever address that I have in the database to get the latitude and longitude. So that gives me the same sort of behavior that I have on FileMaker Go. Now, what if I want to do the opposite? I am in the field, and I track down addresses. So I may be, gold hunter, and I want to exactly spot where there is gold on this, maybe in a street. So I'd say, OK, I'll try to set the FileMaker Paris office. I know this address. I was in the Paris office. I just get the location from the mobile functions within FileMaker Go, and I got those two numbers. I don't know what they mean. Well, I'm sure they mean something. So I could do the opposite of what just did, reverse geocoding. And if I do, then I got the address. And just let me show you what it gives me back. And for those two examples, I used the two different outputs. The first one was using XML. The second one was using JSON. JSON is also a structured format, a bit different in terms of doesn't use brackets, use, I don't know how you call that, but use that sort of things. But it's a structured format as well. So you can parse this with the text manipulation function very easily as well. And as soon as I got the results, I just need to look for the address components. This is the street number. This is the long name, This is the neighborhood, quite a nice district. Yep. You got the postal code, and you got the actually formatted address with all this information. And this is quite interesting because you can actually get from any GPS coordinates, if they match a physical address, you can get that information back into FileMaker. So you got both ends, whether you track down GPS coordinates with an iPhone, an iPad, or even something else, and you want afterwards to actually get the readable format of a physical address. It's pretty neat, no? Interesting? Should I stop? Okay. So, getting one address is quite easy. We could do it, for some time. Now we can actually do it more precisely with the geographical coordinates. But would it be nice to have actually directions? And directions is actually something that I use, but most people also use in order to plan, visiting customers or to plan a route between different cities, to see that sort of things. And directions is exactly the same. We will use a URL to format the address and to render that into the web viewer. The first thing we need to do is to parse multiple records, because there are good chances that whatever places you're going to go or whether places you want to map on the map are in different records. So you need to parse those records. You could do it by script or by custom functions to evaluate all found set, for instance. And you create one Google URL. In that example, I will use a standard way to do it, which is using Google Maps URL. So you see that the Google Maps URL is the same as in my first example of I want to map one address. But instead of giving just one address, I give two. And between the two, I have the keyword of two. And actually, you can map multiple addresses by separating them by this keyword two. It's pretty easy. There is one drawback, however, is the length of this request is limited. The length of this URL is limited. You can't go above, I believe it's 2,400 characters. It seems huge, but that can go pretty fast, especially if you have long address names. So you could reduce that by using coordinates. We've seen that in the previous example. But still, it's kind of, maybe, probably, you may run into the problem. We'll see how we can solve that. So for directions, I have two records with two different addresses. I don't need the latitude and longitude coordinates for that example. I just have the FileMaker headquarters in Santa Clara, and I've got the Apple headquarters in Santa Clara. And the only thing that I need to do is actually, I'm driving this by script to build the URL. So that this is the two places that I want to go. And I got the results here. So I can see that I'm going from A to B. That's going to be the, that's Patrick Henry Drive, and this is the Cupertino Drive. So I can see that. I can actually do more than one. I can actually try to get, let's say, O'Farrell Street. That's in San Francisco, I believe. CA. And if I refresh, you can see that I've got those 3 points now mapped. You can see that you can actually zoom in. You have the full control over the web viewer that represents the Google Maps API. So it's actually pretty simple. You can use that as a script, or you could actually use that directly driven by the calculation engine. And that's actually quite interesting to do so because it will automatically map whatever fields, whatever records you have in that selection. So it will map all records based on your found set. So if you select all the customers that you want to go and visit, I don't know, next Tuesday, they're mapped that you're going to visit them, automatically will match that. You can actually also use the ordering. So for instance, I'm going to first go to the headquarters, then I'm going to go to O'Farrell Street, and then I'll finish with, not probably the best one, first FileMaker, then Infinite Loop, then O'Farrell Street. And if you do that ordering, the Google Maps will actually do this ordering. It's pretty easy and it's pretty straightforward. And actually, let me show you the script that it's using here. Is it readable? Yeah. If I look at the web viewer, you see that the URL is not that complicated. You can even read that from anything. It's just the question, then the first address, then the to delimitate two different addresses, then second address, and then the end. This is used within Google Maps to avoid the unnecessary information that you got on top of the map. So it actually gets only the map and not all the information about Google. So that's pretty easy. However, you may run quite fast into the limit of these 2,400 characters. That's why probably you would not use that if you had a lot of addresses that you want to map. And also, you may also want other information, like how long does it take? What is the mileage between all those 3 points? Could be good for expenses report. You can just check where you were, and automatically it will get you the mileage to go to each directions. And you would use probably not the example that I just gave, because you will run easily into the limit. And you could use the directions API. The directions API is a much more robust way of getting directions, and also much more richer. You can actually get more options like travel mode. You may say, I'm walking, cycling, driving, or even transit, where it's available. And you can also get waypoints, whether it's a stop or it's just a way that you have to go through because for whatever reason you had to go through that route. I won't go into details. You got an example at the end, and I'll show you how to get to that example. But that's pretty good if you really want to have mapping or optimized route. So you need to know exactly whether it's better to go to that first customer or to this other, because the route is going to be better. Well, I don't think that handles traffic. It may, but you never know. So getting two addresses, direction between those two addresses or more is quite interesting. However, what's really interesting is I want to map not one, but many points on a map. And that works whether they are addresses or whether they are just GPS coordinates or geographical coordinates. And that's really what it is about mapping, using what you have in your database, what is the information you have in the database, whether they're addresses, and you want to map them to see them visually on a map. The steps to achieve that is a bit different. What I will first do, I will make sure that for all addresses that I have in the database, I have the matching coordinates. I will only work with the coordinates. It's smaller, and it's probably more accurate. So whatever address I have in the database, I will try first to get this address. And it's a one-time process, because obviously the address, if the address changes, I just need to rerun the geocoding script. But that doesn't change. And actually, it's server compatible. So you can actually have that on the server that will actually get the missing coordinates directly automatically for you. Then I will parse that information using custom functions. Why, again, custom functions? Because it's reusable. You can actually copy this from file to files. And instead of using the web viewer in the ways that I was using it since the beginning, is I'm not going to request directly the web viewer, the Google Maps API. What I will do is I will use something that is called within FileMaker the data mode of the web viewer. So instead of getting to a URL, I will actually generate an HTML document inside FileMaker. It's text. And I will ask the web viewer to tell me what means this data URL to the web viewer. It's actually a very, very powerful function. And you know why? It works everywhere. You can actually do that directly, and it works also on FileMaker Go. And it prevents the problem of the long URL, because you're not requesting. You're actually building an HTML document that would be rendered automatically by the web viewer. So, multiple points. Got the same example. I got Patrick Henry Drive, and I've got, I believe that's Adobe here. So I got those two companies pinpoint. How did I do that? Actually, this web viewer does not request the URL. If you look into here, I've got a data text HTML. It's not the URL. It's really, give me what is this HTML document and parse it to render into a readable format by a web viewer. It's just like if you were on the fly creating HTML pages, except that you don't have to write those pages on the disk. You just do this directly within FileMaker. And that's very powerful because you can use whatever standard techniques to manipulate this HTML. HTML is, again, just text. And let me show you, the information here. Open with BBEdit. This is the HTML document that will be generated by FileMaker. This HTML is a bit, it's not long. It's, 51 lines? I'm pretty sure you have scripts that are longer than that in your solutions. And if you look at that, it's a pretty standard, HTML document, except that it uses JavaScript inside. The JavaScript is actually a language, a programming language that lives within the HTML to actually have more power inside the HTML document. And if you look at that, you don't actually need to understand how that works. What you need to see is patterns. What you need to see is where I've got a function to initialize, and then I see that I've got all my positions here. And as you can see, those positions are just listed one after another. It's actually an array. Array is just a sort of a smarter repeating field. And I've got an array with all my positions. So if this is text, I can easily replace whatever is inside using calculation to create not 1, 2, 3, but to create thousands of addresses. Because the only thing that I need is to replace and add a new line to say, now I want to go to O'Farrell Street, to Adobe, to Apple Inc., to Collins Avenue. I just need to add a new line here, and it will render adding this. So that's exactly what I did, is I looked what the HTML is on a web browser, look inside the code, and just add a few lines. So let's see how that works. Now, if I want to add one infinite loop, that's going to be, I don't know the address, it's going to be Cupertino, CA, USA. And what I need is the coordinates. I'm not working with addresses. So I just need to transform that. We've seen that before, how I could do that. That's it. I got now this address. And actually, yeah, the address is pretty. One infinite loop, yeah. OK. What? Oh, yeah, I may have the wrong address. Let me see. Location. OK. So I got those locations directly. And I can add many others. And what the good thing is, those are addresses, but they could work with any type of things because it's just coordinates. If you were a diving a company that wants to know exactly where your dive spots are, they don't match to any addresses. They only match to those coordinates. That would work as well. You could actually pinpoint waypoints or markers in the desert or out in the ocean. And there is no real limitation on the number of points you can have. And just let me show you this. This is actually the audience of the Worldwide FileMaker Developer Conference 2012. This is all of you. This is really all addresses. Well, probably not all of you. I did that a while back. But you can see that with all those addresses, I encode each one of them, and then I represent them on a map. And I can easily see that there is quite a number of developers or participants coming from the East Coast. The West is pretty good, but yeah. I can see that directly. And you can zoom in and analyze the data pretty easy. I think we got a few Japanese friends over. I can just move that back and say, yep, I can see who they're coming. And you can see that this is pretty fast. All the work FileMaker is really good at just managing text, so it can actually create this HTML on the fly, whether there is 2 records or whether there are 1,000 records, and just map them into one global map that you can actually use and analyze. And you can see that it's pretty cool. You can exactly see, well, probably too big. You can exactly represent that information in a nice way. Well, 1,000 is probably a bit big, but if you were to plan a tour, you could actually see all those points and say, well, I've got really much more customers in the East or in the West or in the California, Oregon, whatever. You could map that. And whatever techniques you were using before, sub-summaries, charting, do not give that instant information using a map. Actually, you can go further. The API is really rich. You can do a lot of things just with this API. And let me show you what you could do. This is the 7 offices, the Japan office, the American office, the 3 European offices. Let's try to get only the, I'm going to remove that. And you see that as I remove records from my selection, the map automatically adapts, so saying, I want only the American ones. OK, I just got the 2 offices, Apple and FileMaker. And look, I can actually click on this and say, what is this address? What is this information? And this information is actually driven by FileMaker as well. It's what I have in the database that is formatted to be able to list into it. And what's the beauty of it is you can even have rich content. Look at that. If I were to say, I want this to be highlighted and red. Whoops. And red. That goes there as well. This is I'm using here a very nice function that some of you may know. It's get as CSS. Because it's HTML, I just get as CSS this information. Actually, it's let me here. Yeah, that's here. You could see that as a tooltip. And it's just transforming whatever style you have in your fields into something readable in HTML. No hard coding required. It's automatically driven by this. And that's actually quite interesting because you could actually have a picture. You could actually have a link that will actually match to whatever information you want. You can actually do this directly using FileMaker and having the results directly back. So let me go back to here. So with this API, you actually have a lot of more options. The only thing that I did here was actually to get this information representing on the map. That's the first point that you want to have. And then you can enhance this user experience with having ability to have animations, for instance. When you click on a marker, the marker could bounce, saying, you're here. You can actually have centered. Let's say, I'm here, and I want to see all the customers in a 50 miles radius. You could have that information as well. You can also have custom markers. For instance, to have the mapping of all the FBA members, the platinum in gold, the TechNet members, the FDS members, and having different information depending on the markers. If you have too many markers, you could also have grouping. So grouping is really to say, that's not readable to have that amount of people in New York, for instance. Let me just say how much or how many I have in a sort of a group thing. You can also do that using this API. And I got an example here. It's in French, but you will probably understand it. It's a mapping of, no, not that one. Let me get it. Yeah. It's a mapping using all technology. That's on the web, but obviously you could do that directly on the web viewer. So let me try to see if I got an internet connection. OK, I'll come back to it. OK, so you have the link for all the API information. The help of this API is really extensive. You can actually have a lot of things you can do directly using this API and directly transforming the information that you have in raw data inside FileMaker into something readable on a map. So clusters, actions, photos. However, you may not want to do that. You may not want to go through the hassle of creating this. that's fully understandable. There exist other services that would do, sort of things in between. I just found out in preparing for that session, batchgeo.com is a website where you can actually export in Excel file format the data and ask this service to render that into a map. It's a one-time thing, so you get it, and then you get the map. It doesn't have this interaction that you can do in FileMaker, but I think it would be interesting to know that you could do that. Also, you could also use PHP to run this. You can actually have PHP doing all the heavy work of presenting that information in HTML and use FileMaker to look, and the web viewer to look at that PHP code. That's also another option. And you also have a lot of libraries that could look around matching with the Google API to map this information. You may not want to use Google Maps. And I'll speak about the licensing terms at the end. But you may not want to use, and know that there are others, and it's actually a very famous, very trendy subject now, where you get a lot of people interested in mapping technologies. Bing was released a few years ago. OpenStreetMaps is actually growing a lot. That provides also APIs, and Nokia Maps is also quite interesting to use. So you don't need to use Google Maps. I used all my examples to there, but know that there are other technologies and services that would provide also the same sort of APIs to represent your data into a map. So that's pretty good, but may not be what I need. For all these previous examples, I was just mapping addresses into a map. So I was just geocoding those addresses into a map. I may not want to do that. I may not be interested into the individual locations of each one, but to much more analysis, what does that mean? Do I have more customers, but how much? Do I have more sales in the east or in the west, but by how much? Which is my latest state in the US? Was it's Florida or whether it's California? And for that, you have a number of techniques to do so. You could do charting and have all those states, but you got, what, 50? So, readable is not that probably important. You can also do sub-summary reports and having the top ones at the head, but it's also not really something that you would read, instantly. And it's probably not as dynamic as you would, want to be. So I'll show you two technologies, two techniques to represent data into a map. For this, I will use two things. The first one is going to be Fusion Maps. Fusion Maps doesn't have anything to do with the smart guys in New Zealand fusion reactor. It's actually an Indian company all over to the north. That actually did a few years back a solution based on Flash. If it's Flash, the web viewer can read it. So it's actually quite interesting to feed that information to Flash and get the information back. I will also use SVG at the end. So what is Fusion Maps? Fusion Maps is a library of maps. They are specialized in charting, but we do charting already now since quite some time. So they also have mapping technology. So instead of representing data into a chart, they represent data using a map. And they got extensive list of maps, whether they are maps of countries, whether they're maps of states, whether they're maps of the world, where you can actually target which map you want to use into FileMaker. It's based on Flash, so all the maps are based on Flash, and you feed Flash information with all your information, just like you would do with Google, and the Flash will actually manage all this data and represent that data into a map. It's pretty easy because you can use either scripts or calculations, depending on how you want to do it. And it's not a plugin. It's really just Flash files that sits on the disk that you can actually target. The only thing is it doesn't work on FileMaker Go, obviously, because of iOS and Flash. But yeah, that's something you can do. A few months ago, they actually changed their licensing plan from paid system to free. So that's even better. I've got the link here, and you will get the link in the binder if you're more interested. But I think it would be better to show you. Oh, that's it. That's what I wanted to show you. Grouping, grouping, grouping. Okay. So I've got information. I've got it's dummy data. I've got more than 5,000 records. This is probably all my customers. This is probably all the sales that I did in the past year or in the past month. This is just information that I want to represent. I could do very easily a state graph, just chart by states information. I can see that indeed I got a lot of in Florida, perhaps. Do you have in California and in Pennsylvania, I think. I got quite data, but it's not that informative. What I can do is I can actually have by states. So this is it could be summary, could be the number of customers, could be the number of sales that you can do, driven by states. You want to have a number that will represent how much customers you have or how many sales you did for those states. But you want to represent that on the map. So I want to see whether I'm good in the east or better in the west. And if I do this, I can just refresh the information that's driven by a script. Then I'm transferring this information that may be useful if sorted or if information into a map. Now this is just really, again, the web viewer pointing to a Flash document, and just the web viewer knows how to handle Flash, so it will represent that document into a Flash format. The good thing it's interactive. You can actually have sort of a Hoover. So when you're browsing things, you could say Florida is 1,000 and California is 1.5. So you could see that information. You can actually really direct, saying if it's between 0 and 3,000, it's going to be low. If it's between 3,000 and 7,000, it's going to be moderate. And if it's over, it's going to be high sales. And if you change the information, so for instance, where is Florida? If you change and say, now it's going to be 9,000, refresh, and then suddenly Florida is now at 9K. This is quite interesting because you could use that information. This is here using a portal, but it could also be driven directly by a calculation. So it could also do, depending on a search, depending on the found set, you could have a specific map because you could say, I want to compare my business account manager for the East and my business account manager for the West, and to see how those two are working. It's really good for reporting because you can actually see depending on the map you choose and the criteria you choose. So you can either do that by scripts or by calculations. And if it's by calculation, it's just exactly the same. Instead of you're not giving a script to refresh, whatever data you're going to change will be automatically referred into the web viewer. So if I'm now moving to FileMaker and say, I've got 9,000 as well for California, then California is still there. And again, it's not that complex. Let me show you. The data to do that is actually this. So I don't know if you can read, but I'll try to zoom in. So the first thing I need to know for the calculation is to know where is my Fusion Maps HTML. So this is where you will point all your requests. So it's just a standard HTML file that is given by Fusion Maps. And then you just got all the parameters that you're going to use. Those are just parameters to specify the map, the colors, the size, the decimal. You see that I'm using a dollar currency for this information. I can have the color. And this is just text. So you can actually manipulate that text how the way you want. By changing the value, saying, if it's high sales, I want to be that in red, or if it's low sales, I want that to be in yellow, or whatever color you choose. And all of this purple thing is actually just getting back the data. So it looks big because I've got 50 states, but I mean, it's just roughly the same with just numbers going up and down. Once you've done it, whatever the data is going to change, the web viewer will actually refresh that information because this is going to change, and you will get the results. I really encourage you to look, if you're interested into that, to the extensive list of maps they have. If you're dealing only in, I don't know, in California, and you want to have that map of California, you can actually do that. You can actually have an extensive interaction with those maps using this technique. So, calculation-driven. The other technology I want to show you is SVG. Do you know what is SVG? No? Yeah. SVG is actually a standard, W3C standard. It's actually a way to represent graphics, two-dimensional vector graphics, using text. As if you were saying, I've got a text description, and SVG will actually tell you what that text means into an image. It has been along for a long time. And SVG is really powerful because it's text. And we know from now that FileMaker knows how to handle text. So it's very easy to modify the text to render into a web viewer. SVG is a web format, so you can actually use the web viewer to render that information. And what I'm going to use here is I'm going to also use the data mode of the web viewer. So instead of pointing to a URL or to a file, I will point to itself, to a calculation. And that's really good because the HTML, the SVG, will actually automatically be rendered by FileMaker. So you don't need to have internet connection. You don't need to have external files. It's all self-contained within FileMaker Pro. And it's just a text file. So whatever the text is, it will be rendered by the web viewer to represent that information. So again, I've got that list of cells, and I got same numbers, more than 5,000. And this is my map. This is actually a static map. So this is an SVG document. This SVG document is actually, just a description. I'll show you where this. This is the SVG. This is where it's described. The whole map is described using text. It's actually really powerful because you can describe anything. You can actually expand, and you can actually have a lot of interactions within FileMaker. This is the SVG, document. Okay, and this is for each state. This is the description. So believe that, what is that, Hawaii? HI? Yeah, okay. So for Hawaii, this is how, on a map, all the borders of this state are represented. This is for Arkansas, I believe. What are they represented? So that's pretty big. Yeah. That's Florida. So as you see, it's just a text. You don't actually need to understand, that means to dot that way and this sort of things. You just don't need that. You just need to say, well, I can see that it is Florida. And then I have some parameters here that I could say, this is the stroke, this is the opacity, this is the fill opacity, and this is, different parameters for that state. And because this is text, you can modify it very easily. Look at that. I got the map here, and I've got here a global text field with all the states that I wanted to highlight. And I see that Florida is selected. If I remove, then suddenly Florida doesn't change. And you know why? It's because I'm just changing in the SVG that whenever it's Florida, do not use the highlight color, use the background color. Just replace. It's just really something quite easy. And actually, you could even choose which color you want to use. So I could say, I prefer to the gold one, or I prefer something, something like this. You can change the color. Again, the color is directly driven by the SVG. As you can see here, my let function lets me actually specify the background color to be white, the highlight color, so the one that I've chosen to be map global highlight. And my list is all my selected states. And if I have this, then the only thing that I need is to specify for each variable here that if Hawaii is in that list, use the highlight color, or if not, use the background color. And this information is used. Let me show you here. because it's a calculation, it will be automatically replaced by the value, which gives me the ability to say, I want to have Florida, I want to have Oregon. I have Oregon already, and G. And you can see that whatever text I paste here, I got to see that. So that's pretty simple. That's the basics, saying I got this text file, I just modify a few fields within FileMaker, and these text files will actually be part of that text field. But what would be interesting is actually to get dynamic. So I know those results, I know those data, so I have exactly the same data that I had before with all those numbers, and I want to represent that information using SVG. And the good thing is, it's dynamic as well. I can change, and I see that Florida, where's Florida? Florida is 1,500. I could say, no, it's 9,000. Now Florida has changed. So whatever this data is could be driven directly by calculations, by selection, by analysis, saying, now this is my analysis for this type of products. This is the data that I have. That will be automatically rendered within FileMaker into an SVG format. You can even do more interaction with the SVG. The SVG has the ability to give you information back. This is the data that I have here for that information. And look, if I highlight, I can see the information directly. So I can see that Florida is indeed 9,000. So you can have some sort of interaction with the SVG to get data back. That's pretty cool. And that's really interesting because, let me show you something. It also works on Go. Because it's not Flash, because it's self-contained, and because the web viewer knows how to handle that directly within FileMaker, it works on Go. So you can actually have a map that will be automatically generated by FileMaker and rendered within FileMaker into the web viewer without even needing an internet connection. You can analyze this on a plane, or no, you have internet connection now in planes, but in, I don't know, desert. You could actually see that information. And actually, I just found out yesterday that this works. It's not actually hoovers, you need to select the state, but those, because it's it's not paced to the mouse hooving, you can actually get that data directly in. That font is actually on my iPad, not even connected to the network, and that works, pretty well. You can also change. I'll come back to here. You could also change the coloring. For the purpose of this demonstration, I use exactly the same coloring of the previous example, but you could use whatever color range you want. So you could say much more into this blue type thing. So you got this coloring, ordered, or use another one. That's I put that on random, and you could yeah, you could see that. So you could choose which color you want for low cells, moderate cells, high cells, or out of the scope, and adding those colors directly into FileMaker. You can actually revert that and say, probably the blue one shouldn't be here. And if you change, automatically those colors also change. It's pretty cool, no? Yeah? Well, it gets even cooler. That's probably a bit, yeah. Let's come to something like this. OK. You see that I can get interaction. So I can have this hover over, and I can see that Texas is actually quite a important customer for my situation here. Would it be good to say, when I'm seeing this information, to exactly go directly to those customers, those numbers, those sales that we did in Texas? And actually here, I'm going to use one of the new protocol that we introduced in FileMaker 12. It's actually the ability to say, I can call a file and pass a script and a parameter directly through a URL. You heard about that, the FMP script protocol? It's actually really powerful, because you can call yourself and pass a parameter. So just imagine I'm looking at the results for last year, last quarter, and I want to see who are my customers in Texas, or in Florida. I click here, and I'm on the web viewer. I could never do that before without extensive, plugins and interactions. Here, what I'm just doing is say, parse the parameter of the state. So give me where I clicked. I know that it was basically Florida, and I can pass that parameter to FileMaker to open to a specific layout that will highlight only my Florida customers. And that works for any type. It's dynamic. So if I'm here on Wyoming, right, I can get those information directly back. And just to show you that it's not complex, this is just here. It's just actually 2 lines of code. I just commented this one. This is just saying, use the FMP protocol. Localhost, that's my machine. If you were hosting that file on the server, you would use the server IP address. SVG is the name of my file. And then I got a script with the script is going to be check. And the parameters, the parameter will be driven by the SVG. So if I click on Hawaii, it will pass HI. If I click on California, it will play CA. Then the only thing that I need on my script is to get that parameter and analyze and present with whatever information I need. That works. This technique could work in that example, but also works in all the other examples that I've shown you, because it's a URL. It has nothing to do basically with FileMaker. You can actually use that to connect to yourself. It would be used for even the multi-point locations. You remember what I had, the headquarters of FileMaker. I could have a link there to go directly to that specific customer. Or I could have a link there to go to the website or interact with FileMaker. I believe there are numerous sessions this developer conference dealing with that FMP script protocol. So there is one important information that you need to know. All of this that I've shown you, not everything is free. You really need to check the licensing options of Google Maps. There is a limitation actually on geocoding requests you could do. The limit is 2,500 per 24 hours. So unless you're giving a session like I did, I actually reached that limit 2 days ago because I was geocoding all the attendees. You're pretty safe. But you really need to check the licensing terms, especially whether you were going to develop it for your own use or for others, how you're going to develop that. So check the licensing term is going to be in the node fields. It's also very volatile, meaning you are depending, especially on the Google Maps API, not on SVG or on the Flash, but you're actually depending on an external service. So if you're developing these techniques for a customer or for your internal use, you may want to check or to be notified whether this API may change or the results may change, because obviously, you don't control everything except on the SVG part. You need to be connected most of the time. So the Google Maps API works, but if you don't have any connection, you are basically stuck with that. And also check the FileMaker Go compatibility. Everything that I've shown you except the Flash part, so the Fusion Maps, works in FileMaker Go. So before I go for the resource, this is really a unique way to represent the data very easily. And very easily, it may seem probably a bit hard to understand the coding, the JavaScript and HTML, but it's a one-time process. You do it once, and you can reuse it afterwards. And actually, you will see that you don't even need to do it once. Think before also what you're going to map. I found it. I've been using these techniques internally at FileMaker Southern Europe quite a lot. I'm the only one using it. I love to see those maps and things. It's very informative, but sometimes think exactly what you want to map, just like charting. Think about before charting exactly what you want to chart. That applies also for mapping. A couple of resources. All of this is based on resources that you can find extensive literature on the internet for managing multiple maps, for managing markers, for managing clusters and these sort of things. You've got geocoding information, the JavaScript, the Google directions. You'll find all those in the slides. However, you will also find examples. one quick example is the first example that I've shown you, the first demo, is actually based on the contact starter solution. You all have it. I mean, if you have FileMaker Go or FileMaker 12, you have this example of geocoding and reverse geocoding. Once you have it, you just need to copy and paste and use in your solution. It's actually pretty straightforward. I've also found out a few colleagues and developers that actually did some work around mapping and geolocation. You've got the links here. And actually, you also got a very interesting link from Kevin Frank and Andrew Salin, I believe, that did for directions. So how I can have multiple points and know the directions, the mileage between those 2 points, or even change the order that I want to use. So I really hope you're going to, if you really want to find more information, you can look there. Also, all the examples that I've shown you today, I will post them in my updates. So you will get all those examples except the one, well, except the data. You will not get all the attendees list, but you will get all the information for the data. Thank you very much. And I think I got a few time for question and answers.
Could you apply this to a physical layout of a building using SVG to show people in rooms?
Yeah, you could. The SVG is actually, the question was, can I do that on a building to match a building and to map people? The SVG is just a text format. You can render this room, for instance, and have all those seats rendered. There exist numerous of applications to create the SVG, so from a vector graphic tool, and then you can use that into FileMaker. I've seen, for instance, SVG used for doctors to match, the size over time for different children. This is one way to represent data using SVG. You could easily do that. Yeah.
Any good resources for demographic information?
States, government, you mean?
States, median income, household size, that type of thing.
I don't know for specific US. I know in Europe you can get that information, but no, for US, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah.
If you have an odd-shaped vector,
Yeah.
is there a way of determining whether a particular geolocation is within
That shape. So the question is, if you have a shape, how do you know that?
Not just a square.
Not just a square. You get a shape, or for instance, a state, for instance, and you want to know whether this information is within that state. Yes, you can. You can do that by two ways, either by analyzing the GPS coordinates or the geographical coordinates, because you would know what that shape is, so you could know if that particular location is within that range. You could do that, or you could use the API to actually give you that information. If you've seen, when you use the Google Maps API to render an address into a map, you also have the ability to say, just highlight the neighborhood. So it will highlight the neighborhood around that point, and then you could get that information back. Yeah.
Can you also, in the Google Maps API, drop a pin and get that latitude and longitude into
Drop a pin within Google Maps direction on the iPad. I think you can, but you would, yes, I think you can drop a pin using the FMP script protocol to send back that information to FileMaker. Yes, you can. It will need, however, some mechanism to know exactly when you've clicked, because it's not going to be a hover, it's going to be a selection, and then you click to drop the pin. Yeah, the pin knows where you are, and it will only give you back the GPS, or the geographical coordinates of that pin. And you can send that back to FileMaker using the FMP script protocol. Yeah, the FMP protocol, URL protocol. Yep.
You know anything about the new Apple mapping API?
That I don't know. I don't know. And even if I knew. Thanks very much. Really hope you enjoyed it. Remember to fill your evaluation form, and again, check for the updates. The Slides have slightly been modified, and the examples will be posted on the DevCon sessions. Thank you very much.